She watched them from behind the curtain, fingers pressed flat against the glass, jaw tight, phone already warm in her hand. To Marietta Forney, the new family pulling into the house next door had no business being on Cedarwood Lane. She called them suspicious. She called them a threat. She told herself she was protecting the neighborhood when she dialed 911 and described a scene that existed only inside the architecture of her own prejudice. But Marietta made a catastrophic miscalculation. She didn't know that the man she was pointing her finger at had spent 15 years on the federal bench, sentencing crime bosses, drug kingpins, and corrupt officials who thought the law didn't apply to them. She didn't know that the woman standing beside him, arms folded, quiet as a loaded courtroom, had authored the legal opinion that dismantled a billion-dollar trafficking operation. Marietta thought she was calling the cops on her neighbors. She had no idea she was about to hand 2 federal judges and an entire network of DOJ attorneys the most airtight civil rights case they'd seen in a decade. When the sirens came, they weren't coming for the McLeans. The Welcome to Cedarwood Estates sign had always struck Marietta Forney as a personal achievement, brushed bronze lettering on quarried limestone. She had campaigned for it at 3 consecutive HOA meetings, selected the font herself, and photographed it for the neighborhood newsletter the morning it was installed. It wasn't just a sign, it was a standard. And for 11 years, Marietta had appointed herself the living enforcement of that standard. She knew which residents used non-approved mulch colors. She knew whose holiday lights stayed up past February 15th. She had a laminated copy of the Cedarwood Covenants, conditions, and restrictions folded into her purse at all times, like a concealed weapon, which, for Marietta Forney, it essentially was. So when the moving truck groaned around the bend of Sycamore Circle at 9:07 on a blazing Thursday morning in August, Marietta was already at her upstairs window. She had been there since 8:45. It wasn't a modest truck. It was an enormous, climate-controlled freight hauler, the kind reserved for people moving things that couldn't be trusted to standard equipment. Marietta watched it nose toward the driveway of 14 Sycamore Circle and felt something cold move through her chest. That house, a 4,000-square-foot Craftsman with coffered ceilings, a 3-car garage, and a half-acre of professionally landscaped grounds, had sat under a sale-pending sign for 6 weeks. Marietta had checked the county property transfer records every single day. The buyer, listed under an LLC called Meridian Crest Holdings, had told her nothing. No name, no face, no origin. Just a corporate shell and a cashier's check for $2.1 million. In Marietta's experience, which was, in truth, the experience of a woman who had never left a 20-mile radius of the neighborhood she'd grown up in, legitimate people didn't hide behind LLCs, legitimate people put their names on things. Raymond, she called toward the hallway, not taking her eyes off the truck. Her husband appeared in the doorway holding a coffee mug, still in his weekend clothes despite it being a Thursday. Raymond Forney was a man who had learned, over 14 years of marriage, that when Marietta used that particular tone, the most efficient response was simply to materialize and wait. "They're here," she announced. "Who's here?" "Them. The new ones. Look at the size of that truck. That is a commercial vehicle, Raymond. The CC and RS explicitly prohibit commercial vehicle staging in residential driveways for longer than. Marietta, it's a moving truck. Every person who has ever moved anywhere has used a moving truck. That is not a moving truck. That is a statement." Raymond looked at the truck. It was a moving truck. He said nothing. Then the second vehicle turned onto Sycamore Circle, and Marietta's spine went rigid. A black Mercedes GLS, the long wheelbase Maybach configuration, the kind that suggested not just wealth but the particular, unhurried kind of wealth that doesn't feel the need to announce itself, rolled to a smooth stop behind the hauler. The engine made no sound when it cut off. The door opened without urgency. "Oh," Marietta breathed. It was not a pleasant Daniel McLean stepped out. He was tall, well over 6 feet, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of calm, considered physicality of a man entirely at ease in his own body. He wore a navy polo shirt, pressed khaki trousers, and a dress watch that caught the morning light with the quiet confidence of an object that had nothing to prove. He did not look at the neighborhood with awe. He did not look at it with relief or gratitude. He looked at the house the way a person looks at something they already own, which, of course, he did. "Drug money," Marietta murmured. "Has to be." "Marietta, I'm not saying anything, Raymond.
I'm observing."
"That watch is ostentatious. That car is ostentatious. People who earn money the right way don't feel the need to. That's a standard production vehicle. It is not standard." Daniel McLean walked around the front of the car and opened the passenger door. His wife stepped out. She was striking. Dark hair swept over one shoulder, wearing a sleeveless white wrap dress that moved like it had been cut specifically for her. She held nothing in her hands. She needed nothing. She surveyed the house with the quiet, efficient gaze of someone cataloging information rather than admiring a view. Then she said something to her husband, just a few words low, and he laughed, and they walked toward the front door together with the ease of two people who had been a team for a very long time. Marietta pressed closer to the glass. "They look arrogant," she said. Raymond set down his mug. "They look like people moving into a house. I know what I see, Raymond. I have lived on this street for 11 years. I know the character of this neighborhood, and that," she gestured vaguely at the scene below, "is not the character of this neighborhood." Raymond looked at his wife for a long moment. Then he picked his mug back up and walked out of the room. Marietta didn't notice. She had already retrieved her notebook. 9:07 a.m. Large commercial freight vehicle. No visible permit. New residents arrived in luxury SUV. Mercedes. Black. Male subject. Tall. Dark clothing. Expensive watch. Conspicuous display of wealth. Female subject. White dress. No visible employment indicators. Demeanor. Entitled. Will monitor. She underlined will monitor twice. The first confrontation arrived before the truck was half unloaded. Marietta had changed into her confrontation outfit. A bright floral dress she associated with authority, because it was cheerful, and cheerful made people underestimate how serious she was, and walked across the lawn with her phone in one hand and a printed copy of HOA parking regulations in the other. Daniel McLean was standing at the foot of his driveway, watching two movers maneuver a large piece of furniture toward the front door, when he heard her coming. He turned. He had kind eyes. That was the first thing anyone noticed about Daniel McLean, before the bearing, before the composure, before the precise way he chose his words. He had patient, perceptive eyes that had spent years reading people in high-pressure rooms and had become very, very good at it. He smiled. "Good morning." "It is not yet good," Marietta said. "That vehicle is partially blocking the fire lane easement. Per Section 4, Article C of the Cedarwood Estates Covenants. I don't believe we've met." He extended his hand. "Daniel McLean." Marietta did not take it. She pointed at the truck's rear wheel, which was a full 2 feet inside the property line. "That tire is on the HOA verge. If that sod sustains damage, the restoration fee schedule begins at $400, and I will see that it is assessed." Daniel looked at the tire. He looked back at Marietta. The smile didn't leave his face, but something behind his eyes shifted. A quiet recalibration. The way a very experienced person adjusts when they've just accurately identified what they're dealing with. "We'll have the truck moved before any damage occurs," he said. "I appreciate you taking the time." He turned back to the movers. "Watch the threshold on that left corner, Marcus." Marietta stood there for a moment, the wind partially out of her. He had not argued. He had not apologized. He had not looked at her with the combination of discomfort and deference she had come to expect. He had simply dismissed her, pleasantly, completely. "You will want to review the full CC&R document," she called after him. "There are 47 provisions that new residents commonly violate. I can have a copy dropped at your door." "That's very neighborly of you," Daniel said, without turning around. "We'll look forward to it." Inside the house, his wife was directing the placement of a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf along the study wall when Daniel came in. "Who was yelling?" she asked without looking up from the shelf. "The welcome committee." Daniel picked up a box labeled Chambers, fragile, and set it on the study desk. "Name's Marietta. She's the HOA secretary. She's going to be persistent." His wife turned. She had the same quality her husband had, that stillness, that precision, but where his was warm, hers was coolly efficient. She had spent 12 years on the Federal Circuit Court. She had heard every argument, anticipated every tactic, and delivered judgments that ended careers. She did not rattle. "How persistent?" she asked. "The kind that photographs tire tracks." She glanced out the study window. Marietta Forney was, in fact, crouching near the driveway's edge, phone aimed at the ground. "Daniel," her voice was level, "I want 1 year of quiet. That's all I asked for when we moved. 1 year. I know. I don't want to bring the courtroom home with me. Neither do I." He followed her gaze to the window, where Marietta had now straightened up and was making notes in a small spiral notebook, glancing at the house between entries. "But I don't think we're going to have a choice." He unpacked a framed photograph from the box, the two of them in judicial robes, handshakes exchanged with the Chief Justice at a federal ceremony 4 years prior, and set it on the corner of the desk where it caught the light from the window. His wife looked at it for a moment. Then she looked back at Marietta Forney on the lawn, who was now photographing the truck itself, moving methodically around its perimeter like an investigator at a crime scene. "Then she better learn the law," she said quietly, "before she tries to use it against us." The first week was a tutorial in bureaucratic cruelty. Marietta Forney was a woman who had discovered, sometime in her late 30s, that the most devastating power available to someone of her particular temperament was not confrontation, it was process. A shouting match left no paper trail. A formally filed citation, on the other hand, was a document. It was official, carried a fine. It went into a record. And Marietta had spent 11 years cultivating a record-keeping operation of remarkable thoroughness. By Monday of the McLean's first full week on Cedarwood Lane, she had already filed 2 complaints. The first, violation, refuse receptacles visible from public right-of-way during non-collection hours.
Fine. $75.
The recycling bins, teal and gray, had been left at the side of the house by the movers and not yet moved to their designated enclosure. Daniel paid the fine electronically within the hour. He sent no reply. The second arrived Wednesday, violation, unauthorized exterior modification, security camera installation without architectural review board pre-approval. Fine, $200 plus mandatory removal within 14 days. Daniel stood on the front porch reading the notice. He looked at the slim, black cameras mounted at the corners of the roofline. He looked at the identical cameras on the Hendersons' house across the street, installed 2 summers ago, no citation ever issued. He walked across the lawn to the Forney residence and rang the bell. A man answered, tired eyes, the look of someone perpetually braced for impact. "Good afternoon," Daniel said pleasantly. "Raymond, isn't it? Is Marietta available?" She's not available right now." Daniel nodded. He raised his voice, just slightly, not rudely, but with the calibrated projection of a man who had spent decades ensuring courtrooms could hear him clearly. "Could you pass along a message for me? Federal judicial security protocols require exterior monitoring at my residence. As those requirements are codified under federal guidelines, they supersede local HOA architectural bylaws under the Supremacy Clause. I'd hate for the association to inadvertently expose itself to a federal obstruction filing. Tell her I'm happy to provide the documentation. I think it'll clear everything right up." He smiled at Raymond. Raymond looked like a man watching a weather system approach from the horizon. "You have a good afternoon," Daniel said, and walked back across the lawn. Inside the Forney kitchen, Marietta straightened up from where she'd been crouching beside the door. "Did you hear that?" she hissed. "Federal judicial something or other. Supremacy Clause. He's making things up, Raymond. He's trying to intimidate us with lawyer words. That's what these people do." "He sounded like he knew what he was talking about," Raymond said carefully. "Of course he sounded like it. That's the point. You sound authoritative, people back down." She was already at her laptop, pulling up a search window. "I cannot find a single Daniel McLean in any professional database that matches that man. No linkage, no company website, nothing." What Marietta did not know, and what she would have found had she searched the Honorable Daniel A. McLean, was that his professional profile was deliberately limited, his public footprint scrubbed to a minimum as a standard federal judicial security measure. His name appeared in legal opinions, congressional records, and Department of Justice correspondence. It did not appear in the places Marietta Forney knew how to look. To Marietta, the absence of a Facebook profile was proof of criminal concealment. "Ghost," she muttered, scrolling. "He's a ghost. Ghosts don't buy $2 million houses with real money." She opened a new tab and began drafting an email to the full HOA board. Subject: Urgent pattern of intimidation and possible fraudulent claims by new resident, 14 Sycamore Circle. She typed with the focused velocity of a woman who had finally found her purpose. Outside, on the quiet curve of Sycamore Circle, Daniel McLean finished unboxing his study, the law books arranged by subject, the framed rulings stacked in order of significance, the Judicial Commission certificate centered above the fireplace where anyone entering the room would see it immediately. He had not wanted a fight. He had moved to Cedarwood Lane specifically to leave behind the weight of the federal bench, the 4 a.m. case files, the security details, the sense of permanent consequence that came with every decision he rendered. He had wanted a lawn, porch, summer evenings without a docket waiting. But as he stood at his study window and watched Marietta Forney, floral dress brilliant in the August heat, notebook open, pen moving in short, aggressive strokes, he understood with the clarity of long experience that some conflicts do not wait for an invitation. He had spent 15 years as a federal judge. He knew exactly what a person looked like when they were building a case. The question was whether Marietta Forney understood what she was building one against. She didn't. Not yet. But she was about to receive the most thorough legal education of her life, and unlike the cases Daniel McLean typically presided over, this one would not take 15 years to reach its verdict. It would take 11 days. The sale pending sign had been staked into the lawn of 14 Sycamore Circle for 6 weeks. And for 6 weeks Marietta Forney had checked the county property transfer database every single morning before her coffee was finished brewing. The buyer was listed under Meridian Crest Holdings, LLC, no individual name, no forwarding address, no traceable human being attached to a cashier's check for $2.1 million. Just a corporate shell and a closed door. It had kept her up at night. Legitimate people put their names on things. She was at her upstairs window by 8:45 on a Thursday morning in August when the moving truck finally turned onto Sycamore Circle. It was enormous, a climate-controlled freight hauler, the kind reserved for things too valuable to trust to standard equipment, and it rolled toward the finest property on the cul-de-sac with a slow, unhurried confidence that Marietta found immediately offensive. She retrieved her notebook. Then the second vehicle appeared, and her pen stopped moving. A black Mercedes GLS, the long wheelbase Maybach configuration, rolled to a soundless stop behind the hauler.
No urgency.
No noise. The door opened and Daniel McLean stepped out. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, and dressed with the kind of effortless precision that suggested he had never once in his adult life been uncertain about how he should appear. Navy polo, pressed khakis, a dress watch that caught the morning light and held it without apology. He did not look at the neighborhood the way newcomers usually did, with relief, with gratitude, with the faint self-consciousness of someone aware they are being observed. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he already owns. Which, of course, he did. Something inside Marietta Forney went very still and then very hard. She underlined "will monitor" 3 times. She changed into her floral dress first. The bright one, hot pink and yellow blooms on a white background. The one she wore when she needed people to underestimate how serious she was. Then she picked up her phone, pulled up the Cedarwood CC and RS to the parking provisions section, and walked across the lawn with the focused energy of a woman answering a calling. Daniel McLean was at the foot of his driveway, watching 2 movers negotiate a large cabinet toward the front door, when he heard her coming. He turned. His expression was open, unhurried, the expression of a man with no reason to brace himself. "Good morning," he said. "That vehicle," Marietta announced, pointing at the hauler, "is encroaching on the fire lane easement designated under Cedarwood Municipal Code Section 12, Paragraph 4. Commercial staging vehicles are required to maintain a minimum 8-foot clearance from the curb boundary during active residential hours." Daniel looked at the truck. He looked at Marietta. He nodded once. Slowly, thoughtfully, the way a person nods when they are genuinely listening rather than simply waiting for their turn to speak. "I believe you're referencing the 2019 revision," he said pleasantly. "That provision was amended in 2022. The updated ordinance exempts licensed residential relocation vehicles during active move-in operations, provided they clear the easement within the same calendar day. Which we will." He paused. "Will be finished well before 4. Marietta opened her mouth, then closed it. He had not raised his voice. He had not been unkind. He had simply and completely taken the ground out from under her, with the casual precision of someone for whom this required no particular effort. He turned back to his movers. "Easy on that left corner, Marcus." Marietta retreated across the lawn. Her notebook was already open before she reached her door. She did not forget. She never forgot. But for the first time in 11 years on Sycamore Circle, her pen hesitated above the page, searching, with some difficulty, for the right place to begin. The citations arrived like clockwork, 3 in 5 days. Each one slipped into the McLean's mailbox in a sealed HOA envelope with Marietta's return address printed in the upper left corner with the neat, self-important precision of someone who considered bureaucracy an art form. The first targeted the basketball hoop Daniel's sons had assembled in the driveway, a regulation height unit, properly anchored, positioned entirely within the property line. Unauthorized recreational structure. Approval pending architectural review.
Fine. $100.
What Marietta had either failed to check or chosen to ignore was that the hoop carried a valid city residential equipment permit, applied for and approved 3 weeks before the McLeans ever set foot on Sycamore Circle. The second complained that a security camera was oriented toward neighboring properties in violation of resident privacy standards. The camera in question faced the McLeans' own driveway. It had never, at any angle, captured a single inch of Marietta Forney's lawn. The third was a noise complaint, filed at 2:17 on a Tuesday afternoon. Daniel's wife read all 3 at the kitchen counter, setting each page down with the quiet deliberateness of someone arranging evidence. She was still in her reading glasses. She did not appear angry. She appeared focused, which, to anyone who knew her, was considerably more concerning. She drafted her responses the same evening. 3 letters, each one precise, formally structured, and ice-cold with legal fluency. She cited the municipal permit number for the basketball hoop, the camera's field of view certification, and, for the noise complaint, a paragraph on the evidentiary standard required to substantiate a residential disturbance filing under state ordinance. A standard that a sound recorded at conversational volume on a Tuesday afternoon would catastrophically fail to meet. The HOA board received the letters on Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, 2 of its 4 members had quietly stopped returning Marietta Forney's calls. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Marietta escalated from paperwork to physics. She waited until Daniel's wife had pulled into the driveway and stepped out of the car before making her move, timing it with the practiced instinct of someone who understood that the most effective provocations required an audience. She reversed her SUV out of her own driveway in a long, deliberate arc and parked it squarely at the edge of the McLean property line, cutting off the driveway's exit with the blunt efficiency of a closing gate. Then she rolled down her window and studied her phone, projecting the serene indifference of a woman simply stopped mid-conversation. Daniel's wife stood beside her car for a moment. She looked at the SUV. She looked at its position, the calculated angle of it, the precise degree to which it blocked without technically touching, and her expression did not change. She set her bag back down on the passenger seat. She folded her arms. And then she walked toward Marietta's window with the unhurried stride of someone who has never once in her professional life needed to rush to make a point. "I'll need you to move the vehicle," she said. Her voice was conversational, almost gentle. "I'm just finishing a call," Marietta said, not looking up. "You're obstructing a private residential driveway. Under State Traffic Code Section 22500, Subdivision F, that constitutes an unlawful obstruction of an access easement." She paused. "That's a towable offense. It also opens you to a civil liability claim under Section 3482 if any resident is demonstrably impeded. And given that I have 2 witnesses and a security camera," she gestured toward the roofline, "I'm fairly confident about the demonstrably part." Marietta's phone screen went dark in her hand. She started the engine. She moved the car without another word, pulling back into her own driveway with the stiff, over-controlled movements of a woman swallowing something she very much wanted to say. Daniel's wife watched until the SUV was fully clear. Then she picked up her bag, walked into the house, and closed the door quietly behind her. The dinner party was, by any reasonable measure, an unremarkable Friday evening gathering. 8 guests, catered meal, conversation that ran late into the night on the McLean's back patio. Quiet enough that the neighbors 2 houses down heard nothing at all. Marietta Forney, however, was not watching from 2 houses down. She had positioned herself at the upstairs window at 6:15, binoculars in hand. The specialized ones she maintained were for birdwatching, and she did not move for 3 hours. The guests arrived in intervals. They were well-dressed, unhurried, carrying wine bottles and the easy familiarity of people who had known each other a long time. Most arrived in dark sedans, several of which bore government-issue license plates, the kind assigned to federal employees, distinctive in their formatting to anyone who knew what to look for. Marietta did not know what to look for. She wrote down unmarked official vehicles and underlined it twice. Then the man in the charcoal blazer stepped out of a black SUV, and Marietta's binoculars stopped moving. As he turned to close the car door, his jacket shifted, just for a moment, just enough. The holster was unmistakable. A shoulder rig, the kind worn by people who carry weapons as a professional requirement rather than a personal preference. He shook Daniel's hand at the door and went inside, laughing at something, entirely at ease. Marietta lowered her binoculars slowly. Her mind, which had spent 11 years constructing narratives around incomplete evidence, went to work with terrible efficiency. Government plates, a firearm, an anonymous LLC, a man whose name produced no ordinary search results, a wife who quoted statutes from memory. She opened her notebook to a fresh page. At the top, in careful block letters, she wrote, Friday. Witnessed. Armed subject, official vehicles, suspicious gathering, possible criminal enterprise. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone, and she began to craft a different kind of story entirely. She had been building toward this moment for 11 days, though she would not have described it that way. She would have said she was protecting her neighborhood. She would have said she had no choice. At 9:47 on a Friday evening, Marietta Forney picked up her phone. She had spent the previous 20 minutes at her upstairs window, cataloging the McLean's dinner party through binoculars with the systematic focus of a woman who had long since stopped questioning her own methods. She had counted the vehicles, 6, all of them dark, 2 bearing government fleet plates she didn't recognize. She had watched a tall man in a blazer embrace Daniel on the front steps and noted the unmistakable rectangular outline beneath his jacket. She had decided, in the sovereign courtroom of her own certainty, what that outline meant. She dialed carefully, deliberately. She had thought about the words she would use. I need to report a suspected armed gathering at 14 Sycamore Circle, she said, her voice pitched to convey a credible register of fear. There are multiple men. I can see weapons. They've been coming and going for over an hour, and I don't feel safe. I don't know what's happening in there, but something is very wrong. The dispatcher asked clarifying questions. Marietta answered each one with the selective precision of someone who understood that the most effective lies are built around a scaffolding of technically observable facts. Yes, she had seen something under a jacket. Yes, the vehicles were unfamiliar. Yes, she was genuinely frightened, and this last part, at least, required no performance whatsoever because Marietta Forney was frightened. She was frightened that the McLeans would stay, that they would win, that 11 years of careful, exhausting vigilance would dissolve against the calm, immovable fact of their presence. She hung up and returned to the window. She watched the warm light spilling from 14 Sycamore Circle onto the manicured lawn, the sound of quiet conversation and occasional laughter drifting across the summer dark, and she felt the cold, certain satisfaction of a woman who believes she has finally found the lever that will move the world back into its proper order. The sirens, she told herself, would fix everything. She had never been more wrong about anything in her life. The patrol cars came first, then a second unit, their lights cutting blue and red across the quiet face of Sycamore Circle. Marietta watched from her window, phone pressed to her cheek, heart drumming with the particular electricity of a person who believes justice is finally moving in their direction. The lead officer approached the front door with his hand resting at his side. Standard posture, standard protocol. Nothing about the call had suggested otherwise. The door opened before he reached the steps. Daniel McLean came out unhurried, in the same calm, deliberate way he did everything, as though the presence of 3 police vehicles in his driveway was a minor administrative inconvenience rather than a crisis. He was already holding his credentials. He extended them toward the officer with the practiced ease of a man who had done this before, in rooms considerably more tense than a suburban front lawn on a Friday night. The officer looked at them. He looked at Daniel. He looked back at the credentials. His hand came away from his side. Behind Daniel, his wife appeared in the doorway, arms folded, white dress catching the blue-white pulse of the patrol lights. And behind her, the dinner guests began to filter out with the unhurried composure of people entirely untroubled by law enforcement. A tall man in a blazer drew back his jacket and displayed a U.S. Marshal's badge in one smooth motion. A woman in a charcoal blazer identified herself as a federal prosecutor with the Department of Justice, producing her own credentials before the second officer had finished forming his question. The lead officer looked at the assembled faces on the porch. Then he looked across the lawn toward the Forney residence. Marietta was still there, visible in the amber rectangle of her upstairs window, phone to her ear, one finger pressed to the glass. Still pointing, still certain. The officer's face did not harden. It did something worse. It went completely quietly still, the expression of a man understanding in real time the precise nature of the situation he had been placed in, and by whom. He turned back to Daniel McLean. "I'm sorry to have disturbed your evening, Your Honor," he said. They did not discuss it at length. They did not need to. Saturday morning, while Marietta Forney was still rehearsing her version of events to Raymond over cold coffee, Daniel McLean sat at his study desk beneath his Judicial Commission certificate and made 3 phone calls. His wife made 2. By noon, a federal civil rights complaint had been drafted, reviewed, and filed with a precision that reflected the combined experience of people who had spent their careers building cases that held. The legal network that assembled around the McLeans in the following 48 hours was not loud. It did not announce itself. It simply began to move with the quiet, coordinated efficiency of a system that knew exactly which documents to request, which statutes applied, and exactly how much weight a pattern of racially motivated false police reports carried in a federal civil rights filing. The investigators pulled Marietta's 911 call history first. What they found was not an isolated incident of poor judgment. It was a record 11 calls over 6 years, each one targeting a black or brown resident, visitor, or contractor on Sycamore Circle, each one unsubstantiated, several of them filed against people who had never returned to the neighborhood afterward. The pattern was not subtle. It was, in the dry language of the federal complaint, consistent, escalating, and demonstrably discriminatory. The Cedarwood Estates HOA board received a preservation notice by Monday morning demanding every document, citation, complaint, and piece of correspondence Marietta Forney had filed or generated in her capacity as secretary. They complied within hours, not out of principle, but out of the specific, galvanizing terror of an organization that has just realized it may have been unwittingly financing a civil rights violation for the better part of a decade. Marietta's meticulous paper trail, every fine and citation and logged surveillance note, had just become the most damaging exhibit in a federal case against her. She had built it herself, page by careful page. The criminal charges came first, filing false police reports, a charge that carried considerably more weight when the falsified report had been deployed against 2 federal judges and a U.S. Marshal. Then the civil suit arrived, a document so thoroughly constructed and so precisely sourced that the attorney Marietta retained for an initial consultation spent 40 minutes reading it in silence before telling her, with professional regret, that she should consider her settlement options. She had no settlement options. She had a 3-bedroom colonial on Sycamore Circle and a husband who had spent the previous week reading 11 years of surveillance notebooks with the expression of a man meeting his wife for the first time. Raymond Forney filed for divorce on a Thursday. He did not make a speech. He left a copy of the filing on the kitchen counter beside her coffee mug and was gone before she came downstairs. The house went on the market in the fall not by choice, but by the compounding arithmetic of legal fees, a pending judgment, and a mortgage that had always required 2 incomes. It sold in 3 weeks. Marietta moved into a 2-bedroom rental apartment on the far side of town, on the 3rd floor of a building with thin walls and a parking lot that flooded when it rained. The neighbors above her kept irregular hours. The neighbors below her had a dog and, apparently, a drum kit. There was no HOA to call. There was no one to call at all. On the Monday morning after the civil judgment was entered, Daniel McLean drove to the federal courthouse, hung his robe on the hook behind his chamber's door, and took his seat on the bench. His clerk set the morning docket in front of him. He reviewed it, uncapped his pen, and signed a federal warrant. Just like any other day. Outside on Sycamore Circle, the leaves on the McLean's front lawn caught the October light, and the neighborhood was very, very quiet. Here's a polished, story-consistent version of your outro. There's a brutal truth buried in everything Marietta Forney lost. The house, the marriage, the carefully tended illusion of a life built on superiority. She spent 11 years convinced she was the gatekeeper of something worth protecting. She never once considered that the gate swings both ways. When you dig a pit for your neighbor, you better measure it carefully. Because karma, it turns out, has impeccable credentials, and in Marietta's case, it showed up wearing a federal judge's robe with 2 U.S. Marshals standing right behind it. Now I want to hear from you. Did Marietta deserve the felony charge, or was losing the house, the husband, and the HOA secretary title punishment enough? And have you ever had a neighbor who weaponized the rules against you, the noise complaints, the parking citations, the passive-aggressive notes? Drop your story in the comments below. Every single one gets read, and some of them might just become the next video. If this story gave you the satisfaction fix you needed today, hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people find these stories. Share this with someone who could use a reminder that the law is a very precise instrument, and it does not care who you think you are. And subscribe so you never miss the next time justice shows up right on time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.